welcome to the first fall 2021 Roxboro House Roundtable. We're very privileged today to have Professor Ahmad Qais Munhazim, who is professor in our hallmarks program. He's going to be discussing today the Afghanistan situation. The way we're going to handle this is we're going to have the professor tell us the situation, give us some history, and then we'll open up towards the end as to questions that you have. It's best to do it that way because of the Zoom format. So with that, thank you very much, Qais, for appearing today. I know that you're under a lot of personal and professional stress, which you're going to tell us, and I greatly appreciate this because I know many faculty and many students really want to become far more knowledgeable on what's going on.
I'm listening to Evan Lane's talk.
Everybody mute if you can, other than, of course, our star, Qais. So with that, we'll have to wait just 2 seconds. He's been called away, and we can vamp a little bit. Did anybody see the Texas governor, what he said? Okay, back to Qais. Okay, Qais, if you can just introduce yourself, give a little background, and then we'll get into it. And unmute yourself.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're all well. And thank you, Evan, for organizing this at the very last minute. Thank you for coming here. And I know this is a difficult time, also at the beginning of the semester. And for me personally, it has been very, very exhausting in terms of what's happening in Afghanistan, where I am from. My name is Ahmad Qais Munhazim. My pronouns are they, them. I teach in the College of Humanities and Sciences, mainly courses in global studies. I was born and raised in Afghanistan, and I moved here over 13 years ago. I was actually home in Kabul this past summer for over 2 months, visiting my family and also doing my research, because my research is on queer and trans Muslims in general, but particularly queer and trans Afghans in relation to war, migration, and displacement. To just give you a quick background of what's happening in Afghanistan, you might have seen the very summary or clips and views of it through your social media, on the news. But it has a much, much deeper history and longer history, especially when it comes to violence and the war. It goes back to 43 years. It's older than me, and it's older than some of my own siblings. We were all in different ways. When we talk about the war, there's so many generations that were born and raised in the middle of the war. And so this goes back to the Cold War, when there was the two power struggles between the Soviet and the US. Capitalism and communism, and Afghanistan in a way became this proxy war. And then that was the place that actually the Soviets really got weakened. This was also a time that in the middle of that I was born, and many other people who lived through that war, they remember what was happening in the country, and also the very first waves of migration. The refugees, for example, you see in California in the US and also in Virginia, are mostly those who came during the very first waves of migration from Afghanistan in the late 80s, and then also 90s. What happened was, when the US and Soviets rivalry by power struggle ended and the Soviet collapsed, there was a gap, and that's when the US immediately pulled out and left without much engagement with the Afghans, or even thinking through what's going to happen with the government.
Guys, if I could just stop you, because I will admit I'm extremely not knowledgeable on this topic, and I really want to learn. What were the Soviets after in Afghanistan? I know there's not oil there, so why were they there to begin with?
So Afghanistan's, in a way, curse is its own geopolitical location. because it's very centrally located. It's close to many other powers. It's close to India. It's also has a very tiny border with China. It's also next to Pakistan, which is a nuclear power. And also it's right next to Iran, which is a major power in the region. And so in a way, it's also very mountainous in terms of its landscape. It's a place that a lot of powers can easily have a war without much casualties on their own. So there's all of that. And so, as you said, yeah, Afghanistan doesn't have resources. It's not a place like Iraq that has oil. It's a place that only and only is prime for its location, its geopolitical location. That's what Soviets saw as an opportunity, because through that they could also get closer to other countries in Asia and also influence other powers around Afghanistan, which was India and also Iran.
So the US saw the Soviets moving into that area as a threat to our power in the region.
Exactly. So this was the Cold War politics, proxy wars, and trying to influence and continuously move forward. And within that, Afghanistan was this very central location where both powers in a way met. And just to give a little context that what happened was the US created a group of Afghans that now we call the Mujahideen, which now you probably see that's a small group now that's fighting from Panjshir against Taliban. That's the only place that Taliban has taken it today in Afghanistan. And so when Mujahideen were created, these were at the roots of it were a few college educated students. They were all in their third, second year of college, freshman, sophomore, but very passionate about revolution in Afghanistan. They did not want the Soviets, they did not want the communists to take over the country. And they created a young Afghan movement, which the US saw that as an opportunity to invest on them and then make them an ally so that they can fight against the Soviet. So that's how the Mujahideen was created. And then they were also shifted from Afghanistan to Pakistan, where the US was pouring its money and creating these Mujahideen, giving them weapons, giving them trainings. And then that grew because within that time also many people were migrating or becoming refugees to Pakistan. And so they were recruiting from those refugees. Many of them didn't have jobs, so that was a good opportunity for them to have some sort of income and some sort of also purpose to be there. And in a way, that's how Mujahideens were created that fought against the Soviets, but with the US money.
Now, from what I understand, Osama bin Laden was somehow related to this as well. What exactly was that?
Yes, so Osama bin Laden was, as I said, Mujahideen were created, was a major leader and trainer for Mujahideen. So when they needed, when Mujahideen groups were created, they all were also in different groups based on their ethnicity, based on language, based also on religious sects, the Shia, Sunni, and all that. So there were 7 different groups. The US needed a codified and unified kind of movement. So that's how they needed a non-Afghan leader who's going to come and in a way lead them all and train them all. And that was Osama bin Laden. They went searching for a sort of neutral, very influential leader, and they found Osama bin Laden in Saudi Arabia. They invited him to come and become sort of a trainer for all these people because he was charismatic, he was influential among very wealthy, also Mujahideen fighters. And that's how he was invited to come and paid by the US to, in a way, unify this group, but also establish training camps for the Mujahideen so that they can actually make sure that the Soviets collapse, which that's what had happened.
And so these groups were successful in fighting the Soviets, am I correct?
Yes. yes, they were successful because that's how the Soviets initially like collapsed. And then that's when the Mujahideen came to Afghanistan, crossing the Pakistan Afghan border.
So who takes power or control of Afghanistan once the Soviets are kicked out?
Once the Soviets left, this was late 1989, there was a vacuum. There was a gap between that time, Dr. Najibullah was the president, and who was also a communist. And so Afghanistan was left in a sense of no governance, except that there was a president who was very weak and didn't know what to do now. Now the Soviets have left, Mujahideen are in a way victorious. So Mujahideen started the war and the fight with the government, trying to take over, just like what's happening now. And then that's when the actual Afghan government reached out back to the US and the international community asking for help. The US said, we are done. We wanted the Soviets to collapse. They did. We can't help you anymore. And they also, in a way, Mujahideen reached out to them to bring this unity that who's going to take over the government. Again, the US did not care anymore. So 1990, that's when actually everything changed, and the Mujahideen took over Kabul and took over the government, and they ruled over the period of 5-6 years. And within that, they were also like power change, but within the different sects of the Mujahideen groups and the civil war. So it went to civil war because there was already a divide between the Mujahideen groups themselves. And the divide was because different countries were funding different groups. For example, Iran was a big player. Iran was paying a lot of money to the group that was Shia. Pakistan was giving money to the group that was Pashtun, Hikmatyar. And then France was a major player. France was paying a lot of money to Ahmad Shah Massoud's group, which is now also his son is fighting in Afghanistan against Taliban. The US was giving overall to a lot of the other groups. So that's how the period in early 90s started happening, the civil war in Afghanistan.
So does that civil war settle before 9/11? Or what is this? So let's use that as a historical date right now.
So when we think about the civil war, I mean, that was called civil war in the it's referred to as civil war, and in the context of Western scholarship and debates. However, for Afghans, it's not a civil war because the weapons that were used were from the US. The weapons, the money that was used was from the French, from Pakistanis, from Iranians, from the US. So it was an international war. It was, however, in turning it to civil war, the responsibility was placed on Afghans that Afghans cannot rule themselves. They are people who are violent, and therefore we have no responsibility for a civil war except that we're just going to sit back and watch and hope that nobody kills others. But even if it happens, we have worked with them for a long time. Maybe they're going to come to peace with each other. And what happened was that within those years of Mujahideen, Taliban is starting to emerge.
What is Taliban? Yeah, if you could define that for us.
Taliban is a group of fighters, a terrorist group that emerged when Osama bin Laden was, in a way, cut off from the US support. So when Mujahideen came to Afghanistan in 1990, Osama bin Laden, who was an Arab, who was very influential, he didn't have a place to come to Afghanistan because he was not Afghan. So he stayed back in Pakistan, and instead he created Taliban. He instead took over all those international fighters, those Pakistanis, Bosnians, Iranians, or many other people from other parts of the world that come to fight. And then he started training them with the hope of going back to Afghanistan, which he did. And so a lot of the Mujahideen group also had international fighters, people who would come and were in a way brainwashed that fighting with Soviets is a religious jihad. It's a way to defend your religion. And so, but they couldn't go to their countries once the Soviets collapsed because they were seen as terrorists in their own countries. They didn't have some of them documents anymore.
Mhm.
And some of them were also used to fighting. So what Osama bin Laden was that he took them in and trained them and then recruited more people to also stand against Mujahideen. And then that's when Taliban were created. And then 1995, when Taliban actually took over, 1996, they took over also then Kabul. 1995, they started going in the country. And that's when Taliban took over. And then they ruled from 1996 to 2001 when 9/11 happened. And then after that, when the US invaded Afghanistan.
So when we talk about the Taliban, I know that in our media, we discuss a lot of what their beliefs are, especially as towards women. If you could tell us what that is and where are those beliefs coming from?
So Taliban has been around now for over 30 years now, in terms of including their training, including the first round of their rulership in Afghanistan. They have their roots in Pakistan. Taliban were trained there. Taliban were also funded in Pakistan. And to a lot of Afghans, Taliban are seen as foreign forces, as foreign terrorists who then also have recruited people from Afghanistan. However, at the leadership, they have people who also then have connections with ISI, the intelligence forces in Pakistan. So their views have not changed at all since their first time in 1990s. When they were in Afghanistan, they were quite oppressive towards women. They follow a very, very fundamentalist, strict version of Islam. To many Muslims, they are not actually Muslim because a lot of the fighters in the Taliban can't actually read or write. They have also not much knowledge of religion. And however, they have used religion in trying to brainwash people, try to recruit forces. And at the core of the Taliban right now is that idea that we can create an emirat, or which is a rulership that is crossing borders, and an Islam that goes beyond just Afghanistan. It's a unification of Muslims across different borders, but they have a very particular version of that Muslim. The Muslim that they see is not me, it's not my family members, it's not any other Muslims that I know. Their version of that Muslim is them, and which that becomes the part of the violence. Women, for example, have no place in their government. Right now, they also eliminated the Ministry of Women's Affairs in Afghanistan. They announced their cabinet, and there's literally no women in their cabinet. They also are coming from a particular ethnic group or ethnic background of Pashtuns, who are the majority in Afghanistan. So in the cabinet, majority are from their ethnic groups, 30 out of the 33 seats. They also, of course, to them, queer and trans people need to be killed. There's also the freedom, there is no much freedom of religion, there's no freedom of political views, but also in terms of education, for example, they immediately divided schools and everything based on gender. And that also, for a particular grade, women can go to school, but then after that, they should be homeschooled. So those are the views that they had in 1990s, and those are exact views that they came back with, despite the fact that there is like this perpetuation in the West that, oh, these are Taliban 2.0, they are changed, they are now worldly, they use phones and they use cameras. but they are still the same people with the same very exact views.
When you talked about that you're Muslim, your family obviously is, how much of these beliefs that you've told us that they have based in the Quran and acceptable, understood religion, or how much of this is just them creating their own philosophy?
None is based on Quran, their views on women are very oppressive, and there is no such view in Islam. Islam has also very different interpretations. It's an Islam that they have taken literal from just the reading of it, and those are at the leadership level. It's an Islam that is in many ways very, very restrictive to minority groups, to women, and also even to men in many ways. Because when in this discussion, we constantly feel like Taliban are only threats to women. Taliban also threat to men in many ways, because they are restricting many, many things that men can or can't do. And so therefore, their interpretation of Quran is the danger, because they have a very, very narrow view of Islam, and that's what they are going to do, and that's what they're following. And that's not the Islam that other Afghans in Afghanistan have practiced or know, or any other Afghans in Turkey or in Morocco. This is a version of Islam that they have created, which is very militant, and it's very, very restricted to Taliban themselves.
So let's take us to 2001 after 9/11. The U.S. becomes, again, very involved in that region. If you can take us from there on what happened.
2001, and to many people now today is actually an important day in Afghanistan, because this is the day that the very first actual suicide bombing happened in 2001. This is 2 days before 9/11 that happened. This is the day that Taliban actually killed the main key Afghan leader, Mujahideen leader, Ahmad Shah Massoud, whose son is now fighting against Taliban in Afghanistan. And so there was he was supposed to be interviewed, and then they put a bomb inside a camera. So the cameraman did suicide bombing and killed this leader. And this leader was mainly the glue between Afghanistan and the West, because he was very well respected by the French. He was very well respected by Iranians. He was very also in some ways respected by the Americans. And so when he was killed, that's when also many believes that 9/11 happened, because he knew and he was aware, and he was the one that was actually trying to stop that, trying to stop the Al-Qaeda network to carry out 9/11. And so with his murder, things also immediately changed. The 9/11 happened, of course, 2 days later. And then it was like less than a month later, October 7, when Afghanistan was invaded. And one thing that we Afghans have continuously over the past 20 years now have been saying is that Afghanistan had nothing to do with 9/11. The 9/11 fighters, the 9/11 suicide bombers came from Saudi Arabia. They didn't have Afghan nationality. None of them was Afghan. The planes didn't fly from Afghanistan. So why invasion of Afghanistan was so important?
Good question. What's the answer to that?
So, and the answer is that the US wanted to blame someone, because it was Americans were so at this heat of emotions. And when that happens, politicians usually wants to give answer to the people. This was one of the biggest major events in the US that the whole world was watching. And the immediate response was, we're going to go after Afghanistan, because that's where we believe Al-Qaeda, or at that time, Osama bin Laden, is hiding. While they knew that Osama bin Laden wasn't in Pakistan, Osama bin Laden was eventually killed in Pakistan. But because they knew that they cannot go into war with Pakistan. Pakistan is also a nuclear power. Pakistan is also an ally to the US for many reasons. So therefore, we're going to go to a country that has very less power. They're weak. We can just overthrow Taliban and then, in a way, stage it that this is what we came for, that this is where the entire problem of terrorism lies. Whereas Afghanistan, yeah, it was ruled by Taliban. They were oppressive, but they had nothing to do with 9/11.
So as I understood it back then, it's going back some, that we were told that he's hiding there, Osama bin Laden, and we're going to go find him and get him, okay? Once we didn't get him, why were we still there, or what was the excuse or goal of being in Afghanistan?
I mean, that changed immediately, the going and then overthrow of Taliban. And then immediately that enemy shifted from Al-Qaeda to Taliban. And then an immediate reasoning behind why we are there, why the US was there, was that we are there to free and liberate Afghan women. Because Taliban were oppressive to women, women couldn't go to work, women couldn't go outside without a companion who should be a family member, a husband or a brother or a father. And so all of those were reasons that the US justified the invasion, and also years and years, despite the fact that these years actually impacted security and safety of those same women that the US claimed to save.
We're looking at 20 years of occupation inside of Afghanistan. And I've been asked by a number of students, what were we doing there? I really want to defer that question to you. We go in there to find out bin Laden. Bin Laden's not there. Then it shifts to, we're there to liberate women from the Taliban. But Saudi Arabia is was just as difficult for women. We weren't invading Saudi Arabia. So I really am trying to understand what we were doing there for 20 years.
Yes, I mean, that's a question we continuously ask, even living in Afghanistan, and that we still are questioning. There are many, many explanations. Being there was also, again, the geopolitical location of Afghanistan. It's also, in a way, indirectly threatening Iran and making sure that China knows the US is powerful, the US can come, and the US is right next door. And so in a way, it's, again, Afghanistan became this proxy war that being in Afghanistan allowed the US to project its powerful position in world order, that this is where we are very militarily powerful, and we are also influential. So it was creating that base there in a way that also threatened Iran in many ways, that also a lot of the responses coming from Iran was not good. And that was for the same reason, that the US needs to leave, because also it was so close to Russia. In a way, it was also threatening to Russia that here, we can stay here. We can also watch the enemies from close by. And so that was one reason that they were there. It's, again, geopolitical influence in the region. But also, many of them had completely lost the path. They had no idea what they were doing, how long they are supposed to be there, what they should focus on. They claim that they are doing state building. They claim that they are doing nation building. And all of that, now we know with this kind of abrupt leaving, that they didn't care about all those nation building, state building, because you don't build a house and then all of a sudden, you're like, you know what, I'm just going to burn this and walk out. That's exactly what the US did.
So that leads us right to now. What is this? The US under Biden starts under Trump pulling out. I mean, it's been a gradual from Obama, from Trump to Biden of pulling out, and now we've pulled out. What is the situation on the ground there?
So the the chains of presidents that they actually had hands in negotiating with Taliban, the same group that was labeled as the terrorist for a long time, for over 20 years now, for 20 years. And then also bringing the same group and say, you know what, you're our collaborators. You should actually come into this table of discussion and negotiations, and you are capable of that negotiation, that you will be taking over the government. And that happens starting from like Obama's time of losing interest in Afghanistan to Trump's continuously perpetuating this idea that Taliban are not terrorists anymore, and to finally Biden putting that final stamp on it. What's happening now that the US, I was in Afghanistan in this past July when, in June, when the US completely left in the middle of the night. We woke up and they were like, hey, the US left. And everybody was confused that what? The US literally like ran away. And they're like, yeah, last night was the last, they just like took off and left. And that was shocking because that's when people knew that things are gonna get worse, because they left without any sort of accountability for the war. It's also not US. The war in Afghanistan was an international war. The UK was involved, France was involved, Germany was involved, Belgium, Norway. All of these people had sent their troops either through NATO or individually. And the problem is that they all left slowly. I was there when the Australian military just left, because they were also caught at killing civilians, and there's still their cases in court. And what they did was they just closed also the embassy and they said, we're gonna leave. And they left. That was the first one that they left. And then the US. And within that leaving, it also gave a lot of psychological, mental power to Taliban to full force come towards Kabul. They were already getting very far ahead in provinces. Afghanistan has 34 provinces, so they were getting really support in rural areas, not in major cities, because the Afghan government was quite fighting against them when they had that support. Although it was weakening towards the past 2-3 years, but that was also because the US was losing, or the international community as a whole was losing interest, and in a way giving everything to Taliban. And so that's when on August 15 that the Taliban actually took over Kabul, and then immediately the whole country just fell in their hands.
I know there's been, particularly in your family and friends, there's been risks. Can you tell us, what those risks being faced by the people of Afghanistan with the Taliban takeover, and if there's anything the U.S. can or should do at this point?
I'm glad that you're bringing it to the people, because in a lot of the discussions of the Afghan war, there's a lot going on in what the youth should have done or what they didn't do, what's Taliban doing. The people who are actually living the violence of war, living this violence of invasion, and also the violence that Taliban is bringing on them are forgotten. And that's how you saw probably images of the airport, the Kabul airport that was stormed, and then also suicide bombing that happened, killed over 200 people and injured over 300 people. It was all because they knew that the country is taken by a terrorist group who is not going to be kind or welcoming to women, to minority groups, or as I said, to a lot of men as well, to queer and trans people. So there was this rush towards leaving. From the Kabul airport was the only airport that they could leave, because they had also closed the borders. Because Pakistan is a collaborator with Taliban, they also closed the border. And many people are still in fear of what's going to happen, because the evacuation started and it ended before it was even promised and planned. The US was supposed to evacuate everybody until August 31st, But then August 25, 26, they immediately were like, we are only going to take our own soldiers, and that's it. My family would just, because of many reasons, that they are also politically involved in terms of women's rights. And in Afghanistan, my sister is a lawyer and served as a judge in the Supreme Court. And so they were all immediately threatened by Taliban, because Taliban, at the core of it, does not see women in leadership roles, but also they don't see women making laws and also drafting laws and implementing those laws. So the first thing they did was they came after judges, especially women judges. And so my sister was threatened immediately by Taliban. They had to, my whole family, they lived together. They had to move. And so for 7-8 days that they were on a run, they had to move every night and change places, going to relatives' homes, going to hotels, until finally they managed to escape. And within that escape, they were promised by the US that they'll be supported, escorted to the airport, because these were high profile people that Taliban are actually chasing. And they didn't, they failed. My family was stuck for 3 nights in a hotel, and then they took their own, in a way, destiny in their own hands. And they were like, you know what, if we wait for them, what if the airport's shut down? And so they went on their own to the airport, and it took them around 12 to 14 hours to get inside the airport. And that 12, 14 hours, especially for what was happening in airport, is actually a very short time. People have spent nights and nights outside. They made the attempts a few times. There was also a lot of shootings outside the airport. The first time they went, an American soldier actually put a gun on my sister, and my sister said that they were pushing people, and she has a 2-year-old child who was on the ground. So she's like, I grabbed my daughter in my arm to just run, and the moment I turned, and then there's an American soldier standing in front of me, putting with a gun, and said, I'm going to shoot you. So my sister was like, at that moment, I thought he's going to shoot. He's not going to tell me. He's actually, the next is he's going to shoot. And the next, she said that she was so scared because the daughter was just like completely zoned out and completely lost and scared. And she's like, I told him, shoot. What's left of this life? Like, everybody's stepping on us at this airport. We can't even move. People are being shot at. And the soldier's response was like, I can't shoot you, but everybody's watching. And because they were people with cameras and filming. And that means this person had no kind of any sympathy or empathy or anything, and for anyone, for human lives. And there were actually a lot of people who were shot. My other sister was actually the one who's lawyer, and she was at immediate risk, was actually pushed in the crowd. Many people were stepping on her. It was really hard to pull her out of the crowd. Many lives were taken during those times, and people made so many attempts to go to the airport. Some never made it. For example, the queer and trans community now I'm helping to get out have made 3 different attempts trying to make it to the airport. They couldn't. They spent even nights outside the airport, and they missed that suicide bombing by only 30 minutes. All of them were on a bus. And we were talking, and I told them to go home, rest, and then come back, because things don't seem that hopeful that they will be able to get to the airport. All they were just outside the airport. Getting to the airport, when I say that, means they are outside this wall of the airport. They can't pass the gate because Americans are stopping them, asking them for documents, for visas, for American passports. And then on this side, Taliban are hitting them and beating them up to go home while leaving the country. So they're in between these 2 powers, and there's only one gate in between them. So those people are still stuck. My family managed to get inside the airport. Uh, and they credit my sister, despite the fact that there's so many people, thousands of people. And so she found someone, one of the soldiers, that she's like, I started begging them literally to let us go, because if we turn back, we probably would not be alive. This is the last chance. And so somebody felt that for them, and then they let them get inside the airport. But even when they got inside, they had to go through several checkpoints inside the airport that were set up by the US military. And then they would check their documents, and then also they push people out from a different door if they didn't see that their documents were complete, knowing that these people are actually escaping war with barely any documents in their hands, except that with the promises of all these countries that they will take them in. Many of them were actually turned out. Even when my family was inside, they spent 24 hours in this open space, sleeping with no food, no water, no bathrooms. They called me crying because that one last soldier that they were giving the documents to said that your documents are not complete. We're not going to let you in. And that was because the Freedom House was helping my family. They called Freedom House, and nobody answered their phone from Freedom House to check, to confirm that these people are coming as refugees. And within that period of 2 minutes that a person didn't answer, the soldier decided that you all need to go back. And so they called me, and then I had to call somebody from a Freedom House to call this person at the airport to let them in. So we can see that the complexities and that fragilities of life, that these very small little moments become either life-saving or life-taking.
What can be done by people who are moved by the horror that's going on and continues to go on in Afghanistan, people trying to get out, who fear for their lives? What can people do to help out?
There's so much. I mean, calling your Congress people, asking them to help these people, because there's a lot of people who are stuck still, especially the most vulnerable ones, women who have worked with international organizations, also queer and trans people, ethnic minorities. These are people that Taliban are going to come after them and kill them. They have already started searching houses and killing people. And there's also a huge mental health tool that is on top of that, that's really deteriorating people's everyday lives. Especially, I'm talking to queer and trans people who are now stuck. They send me notes and messages and voicemails that they're contemplating suicide because they know Taliban are going to come for them. So call your Congress people, tell them to restart evacuations, because US is contemplating to do that, but also start to prioritize these people, the most vulnerable ones. And then also there's a huge number of Afghan refugees that are actually coming to Pennsylvania. Some of them have already come. They are in New Jersey military base. Philadelphia's airport is the second largest in the country that's actually taking refugees, is the second airport. There's a lot of volunteering opportunities with these communities that you can do, childcare, food, clothes. My family, for example, left with just their clothes on. That's it. They didn't have anything else. They had their cash, some documents that they took with them, and that's it. And then even when they went there, they had to go through this sewer that had like dirt and water and everything together. So they had to cross that to get to the airport. And so they spent 3 days in those clothes. And when now they're in Germany, that's when they got donations for clothes. And so it's heartbreaking to see when your family member don't even have clothes anymore, and they left a home with their dreams, with everything that they had behind. So just also what they can do is that to understand that these refugees fleeing wars have actually left a lot that they had back home. Their dreams, their loved ones, their homes. When you see them in one clothes, just know that they're not just that. They're much more than that. They have left their whole lives behind to start a new life. And so all of those volunteer opportunities will really help. And then on top of it, education. Talk about this in your classes, especially that you all are teaching this semester. It's so fresh, and raising awareness around immigration policies that are so restrictive. Right now, countries are promising that they're taking a lot of Afghan refugees, but then they're also prolonging the process. Like my family is still stuck in Germany. They were supposed to come to the US, but they don't even know how long the process is gonna take. I'm happy that they are lucky. They're also lucky that they are safe in Germany, but many people are stuck in other countries that they are still not safe. They're stuck, let's say, in Uganda. Uganda is also have repressive laws against queer and trans people. There are a few queer and trans people who are stuck in Uganda. They don't know when they're going to come to the US. So there are opportunities. Yeah.
If you can give us, and we can all send it to our social media, I can circulate it out. The different relief organizations or area places where money could be sent or supplies can be sent, and we can circulate that in our classrooms. That would be great if you could do that.
Yeah, I will share the volunteering opportunity that's happening here in Philadelphia, but also one thing that I want people to do is to donate to organizations or even individuals in Afghanistan, because this is a very small group of people that got out and who are also the luckiest who are going to come to the US or other countries. But these other millions of people are going to still be stuck in Afghanistan under Taliban rule. And women have already lost their jobs. They have been told not to come to work. So they have lost their income. Many people are actually at the verge of hunger. They haven't been paid their salaries. To also maybe find groups in Afghanistan to send us money to, whatever help that you can, because these are people who will be there for a long time, but not much support.
I think this would be a good point because we only have a couple of minutes left to open up for any questions. If you're on video, raise your hand or just do the digital thing if you can. Does anyone have any questions? Sam, you have a question?
Yeah, hi everyone. Qais, very moving explanation of the current situation. I like how you kind of addressed the personal and the geopolitical. But my question is about actually the geopolitical, and that's if you could kind of put the current situation and the new government into a context of sort of regional rivalries or regional tensions between, say, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and other countries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Sam, for the question. It's an important one because, like I said, Afghanistan has played a major geopolitical role in the superpower game of Soviet and US back in the day, or Russia and Iran and US during the 20 years of US invasion, but also it's playing a major role between the rivalries of Pakistan and India, because with the presence of US in Afghanistan, Afghanistan's relationship was getting much closer to India, who is also a rival to Pakistan, and Pakistan was much more threatened that that's what's going to happen. So one reason that Taliban came with this full force, but very well equipped with all kinds of trainings and weapons and money, was because the Pakistani government's involvement. And within that, it's also then a conversation with also China, because China and Russia are also in a way siding with Pakistan because they also have interest, not only in pushing the US away, but also in the resources that now Afghanistan can offer. Because we have a huge iron mine, that Mesa Aynak, which is in Logar, in central Logar province, that China has had a huge eye on that and continuously wanted to invest and extract the iron from Afghanistan, and they weren't successful. So there's a lot of that rivalry, and also the regional interests that are coming into play in what's happening now in Afghanistan.
Are there any other questions? Tom Schreiner.
Yeah, hi, and thank you, Qais, for taking time to publicly talk about this while you're dealing with so many private issues around it. I appreciate all the things that you're doing. I guess I have a question trying to think about the future of Afghanistan, currently under Taliban rule. It strikes me that the Taliban numerically is not a huge force, and Afghanistan's been a very difficult country to unify. So do you think they can really hold like a central government together, or is there going to be more regional fighting and warlords and things like this coming out of?
Thank you, Tom, this is something that we have thought about, and also we have discussed in our Afghan circle of the future, that what it holds. The Taliban of 1996 that they came in was very different, was very small, was not also supported. This one is also seen as a Taliban group. It's very insignificant, especially when you think about the US power, when you think about other militaries, when you think about even the Afghan military that was very, very highly trained. What is happening in the future, because Afghanistan is in a way, how Afghans would put it, is that it's also now invaded by Pakistan. Pakistan has actually taken over with Taliban being the face. So a lot of the people now in the cabinet that Taliban announced were also leaders in Pakistan. They all have even Pakistani passports. And so that's why the future, in a way, is this rivalry between Pakistan and India and Afghanistan that will continue, because India is now sitting back and watching what's going to happen, because they weren't expecting this to happen. And so, for example, Panjshir is the one tiny province that is fighting against Taliban in Afghanistan, who's the leader that I said that was killed 20 years ago today. His son is fighting, actually. And many people, were killed over the past 2-3 nights. And those were the Pakistani airplanes that were coming and bombing. And so the future is also in this continued influence of Pakistan and the rivalry with Iran and India.
Any other questions? We're running out of time. One more question. Okay, with that, Qais, really, this was incredible. Thank you so much for sharing and educating so many of us, including myself. I know that you have so much on your mind right now, and giving your time. And please send me whatever you can regarding the relief agencies that we can help out with. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I greatly appreciate it, and have a good day. Bye-bye, folks.
Thank you.